Hello everyone, welcome to another video from Fantasy Football Scout. It's another of these FPL drafts from some of the top managers from Scout and the community. Today I'm joined by Mr. Pranil Sheth himself. It's Lateriser. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. I think it's 3 weeks for the season to start. That said, I feel like nobody in the community is really settled on something that's even remotely close to a final draft. And I feel like there's still so much information out there to process. I mean, we've had one Chelsea preseason game. We haven't had a single preseason game from Manchester City, and they have really good fixtures at the start of the season. So I feel like it's just a matter of absorbing information for the next 2 weeks before having a real serious tinker, I reckon.
Yeah. So this is your first draft. You were telling me before we came on. So you've resisted the urge to kind of tinker a little bit up to this point, have you?
Yeah, it's generally the case with me. I don't tinker too much because I feel like you tend to overcomplicate things. If you're tinkering too much, I think you'll end up having everybody who's a legit option in your draft, and then you're going to feel so bad game week one because you've had everybody you've considered who's
That's
remotely
true.
a good FPL pick in your team, and I just don't think that leads to enjoyment of the game. So maybe a couple of drafts and making a decision, and that's about it.
Yep. And good season last season for you. Back into the Elite 64 Generals League, for example.
Yes,
Looking to kick on
yes.
again this year, I'm guessing.
Yes. The problem is that the moment you have a good season, you tend to get a little laid back and you're not reading and researching as much as you probably should. So I'm just hoping that's not the case this season. Still haven't quite gotten into the groove, but
No.
I'm hoping the next 3 weeks change that.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of the same. I mean, there's such a strong template, isn't there, at the moment? If you look on the scout boards and on Twitter, and a lot of teams look the same. When you see that, I don't know, it kind of bores me a little bit, and I end up trying to make teams with a few players a little bit different. You know, I had one with Sterling, Sancho's in my current draft, trying to find that kind of differential pick. I mean, what's your take on it this season? Because you know the template's strong for a reason. There's some really solid picks. You know, five at the back's really popular, for example. Um, a little spoiler for your team though, you've gone a little bit different in a few different ways, which I don't think anyone's going to be too surprised to hear from you. But do you see that as a kind of challenge to try and find those different players that maybe other people aren't considering?
Not game week one. The season before this one had an absolutely terrible season, probably my worst season.
Mm.
And what happened was I tried to get too clever early on, and it was essentially betting against Salah game week one. And everything, he absolutely scored a hat trick on day one. Everybody captained him.
Yeah.
And on day one, I was 35 points behind everybody else. And what happens is you try to do things that are different, and it's a never ending tilt. Uh, so I was speaking to FPL Salah Abdul, and he told me, it's all right to stick with the template early on. And the name Lateriser is Lateriser because I generally tend to have good second half of the seasons. So I was like, you know what, this makes sense. I don't need to take too many gambles early on. That said, the thinking has changed a little because of the unlimited transfers that we have game week
Mm.
16 onwards. I feel like that's a very big factor that not many people are acknowledging at the moment. If if you were playing a single similar season compared to every year where we just had two wildcards and we're setting up our team with our first wildcard for about 20, 25 game weeks, I understand the point of, going back at the back and playing as template and safe as possible. But I'm trying to cram a third premium in because, I'm the, spoiler, I'm going with three premiums as things stand because Spurs fixtures in the first 4 game weeks read Southampton, Chelsea, Wolves, and Forest. I feel like there's an opportunity there. And if you want to go that way, you require a few sacrifices and a few enablers to crop up that have decent fixtures in the first 4 or 5 game weeks. If that does happen by the time we arrive to game week one, I'm inclined to go in that direction because I feel like you can think short term because I think everybody is going to be wildcarding somewhere between game week 4 and game week 8. And I think you can afford to look at a short term draft, which is even unbalanced for 4 or 5 game weeks this season, particularly because everybody's got a clean slate game week 16, no matter what.
Yeah. Don't worry about spoiling anything. It's going to be clickbait that you've gone into the three premiums.
Yeah.
So everyone will kind of really know. Yeah, I mean, was that your strategy last season then? Because you obviously had a good season last year. Did you? I'm guessing you stuck the template again last year was really really strong and it did really well right in those first few
Yeah.
weeks. Were you someone who kind of stuck with that then and kind of rode that early wave?
Yeah, I wrote that early wave. I mean, places in which I went against the template was maybe a couple of picks which I was sure of based on, looking at preseason or something like that, which are probably your 8th, 9th, 10th, or 11th player on the pitch, but not with the really good picks, because the template is a well-educated template. Like it's the template for a reason, and it's not based off whims or fancies. It's a very well-researched template. So, if you're going against it, you need to have really, really strong reasons to go against it. So I have no qualms sticking with the template picks early on. That said, I mean, I do have a couple of people who are a part of the template as things stand, not in my team at the moment. So I'm okay to always make a couple of bets against the template, but maybe not go the whole log, especially with your premium picks.
So no Salah this year.
No chance.
Cool. Let's take a look at your team. Just before we do that, if you are enjoying this video and the pre-season content on Scout, give us a subscribe, give us a like as well. You can follow Late Rise on the FPL Wire, brilliant podcast, award-winning podcast as well, and stream on YouTube. So check out that channel as well. And you can hear from those guys. Absolutely brilliant FPL managers, amazing knowledge too. Right, let's have a look at your team. Then. So you've got Meslier in goal, 4 at the back with Trent, Cancelo, Justin and Luca Dean. Justin and Dean, not seeing those in too many sides. Salah captain, Son, Rashford and Bailey, and then Haaland up top with Mitrovic. Got a few things, for us to discuss with this. The first thing, I guess, is the kind of the threemium structure. Is there any plans to, because the Salah Haaland captaincy seems to work so well, right? And I think that's what's putting a few people off going for that third one, is when would you captain Son between, those two guys? What do you make of that? Or do you just see Son just being such a good option that you just want him and it doesn't really matter even if you're not going to captain him?
The only reason I'm trying to, cram Son into my team is because I see my team lasting for 4 or 5 weeks this season, and I'm very happy to jump early on the wild card. So what I'm really looking at is, I haven't looked beyond game week 5 when I'm looking at the fixtures, because I'm building my team for a really short-term period. And what happens with Son or having 3 premiums, let's say Haaland turns out to be a dud who's played 60 minutes twice, and Pep has decided to bin him because he's not working in the system and he's taking time to integrate his new signing, is that any player that you want that emerges is a couple of moves away. So whether I'm assuming Salah is going to stick in a draft because he's Mr. FPL and he's as reliable as it comes. But then what happens game week 2, 3, 4 is that, let's say somebody emerges in the 8-minute bracket. Let's say Bruno Fernandes or Raheem Sterling emerges picks. You can always go down from one of the 2 premiums and I can decide which of the 2 are looking less enticing. And then I can get another premium and I can go up in any price bracket as well. So, it's a 3-man draft game week 1. It's not necessarily going to be a 3-man draft game week 4 or 5. It just offers flexibility in terms of going wherever I want to early in the season. That's the thinking.
Yep. And those first 4 games for Spurs, they've got Chelsea in game week 2, but Southampton, Wolves, Forest, those 3 games. There's lots of drafts without any Spurs players because Son and Kane are so hard to get. There's some worries now about kind of Kulusevski. Richarlison's come in as well. Perisic, seeing him in quite a few, but again, there's worries about the wing backs. Jed Spence is yet to be priced. But whenever I post a draft which hasn't got any Spurs players in, the first thing anyone always says to me is, "Where's your Spurs players?" And it's because of those first 3 games.
Yeah. If you really think about the underlying stats, they pushed City and Liverpool really, really close since the time Conte is there at the club now, and I think they've had the best window out of anybody this summer in terms of some real upgrades. So you always had these 2 world-class players who were always good FPL picks. Now they have a world-class manager and they have a serious machinery behind them. You have creative players, you have a Bissouma, you have Perisic who's creative on the other side, they have Spence on the other side as well. So I feel like people are underestimating, and Spurs don't have the problem, let's say, Manchester City do in terms of predictability. So even if City, are a way better team than Spurs, but Spurs are getting close to them. The thing with Spurs is they're really predictable in terms of FPL points. I think they have the best FPL picks in the game. That, Son and Kane are going to be involved in the goals. Very set patterns of play. Conte doesn't change much when it comes to that. So that's what I like about them from an FPL point of view. I reckon if people weren't paying attention to EO, a lot more people would have a Son or a Kane in their draft instead of maybe a Haaland.
Yeah, the big player, we're talking about EO, the big player that you haven't got here is Gabriel Jesus. He's featuring in 65% of teams. at the moment. So, we talk. There's some other players. We haven't got any Arsenal players, for example, with Tomiyasu. You've gone for Justin. It's kind of Arsenal that you're kind of missing. They're the team that's kind of the kind of worry. I mean, Jesus has got 2 fairly tricky games, I'd say, Palace and Leicester in the first 2, but then a really nice sea of fixtures. But again, if you're focusing on the first 5, you're just not worrying so much about those first 2 games.
Yep, I'm not, and I'm pretty sure if I decided to, bin Son off and not go with the 3-man draft, I'd probably have Jesus in my team, because I do think he's a good pick. When Arsenal did buy Jesus, I was like, it doesn't really worry me as a United fan to have Arsenal buy somebody like a Jesus, but I've seen the extended highlights for the first 2 games, and he looks really, really sharp. He looks really on it. And then you forget where a player who is in a structured Guardiola formation tends to get a little bit of freedom, and he can thrive. So different people do different things under different managers, and I am worried about Jesus. I won't be lying there, but I'm taking respite in the fact that the first 2 games are tricky against Palace and Leicester. And if he looks like he's just going to be a really, really good pick, I'll just get him in.
Yeah, I think I'm of the opinion he's a good pick as well, no doubt. Yeah. But I'm happy to give him those first 2 games and kind of see what happens. So it's reassuring to know that you're kind of in the same boat. I think a lot of people are going to pick him because of that ownership being so high. I mean, I'm surprised that it's that high. I mean, that is a really, really, is that just because he's a kind of like a marquee signing for them, do you think? He's one of the bigger kind of Premier League movers of the season. I wasn't expecting him to be 60% owned.
It's just that also there are not many forwards that stand out.
That's very true.
So Jesus at 8 million just seems like too good to be true when he's going to be the main man in that Arsenal team. And he's sort of like a hybrid of Lacazette and Eddie Nketiah, if you think about it. I mean, he can, if Arsenal are playing a low block team, he's going to be in and around the box, and he's capable of playing those passes with Saka and Martinelli on either side. And if they're playing against a team that's playing the high line, he's very much capable of being their outlet on the counter as well. So he has both outlets in terms of how he's going to be getting those points. And I don't see any reason. I'm not surprised that he's highly owned. I'm just surprised that he's this highly owned. But everybody likes a new shiny toy. That's why Jesus and Haaland, that have the ownership that they do.
Yep. I mean, you haven't got too many new shiny toys in your team. What you've got is some kind of old boys who you're hoping can kick on. I mean, Rashford, for example, perfect example. Obviously had that incredible season just a few years ago, but has kind of dropped off quite, substantially in the last couple of years. Bailey bought in for big money last season. We're hoping that he can come into the team, be a great 5 million option for us. And Mitrovic, of course, has done okay in the Premier League in the past, not in his last kind of visit though. So let's start with Rashford then. So you've been impressed so far with Ten Hag, I'm guessing, even though it's only pre-season.
Yeah, very, very impressed. So I'm a United fan, so there's always extra detail in terms of how much I'm reading about our club, how much I'm watching, etc. as well. And because of the banter club perception that we've had since the past 2 or 3 years, people are probably going to be slow on United, I reckon. And I think that's going to be an opportunity. I don't think many people have realized that we have an elite, highly rated manager at the helm, and everything that he's doing in terms of training, the amount of hours he's putting in, the amount of detail that is required to be a player under Ten Hag is just impressing me. I mean, the first game that I saw, a lot of our players were making off the ball runs, and that hasn't happened in 2 years. A lot of these players, when they came to play under Solskjaer, the thing that Solskjaer told them was express yourself. There wasn't set patterns of play under United, and that's primarily been what he's been talking about. That's primarily been what the players who are training under him are talking about. And what I've seen so far in terms of set patterns of play, etc., as well, it's quite encouraging. What was noteworthy was that in the second game, in the preseason game, so Ten Hag's had a first team sort of team that's playing the first 45 minutes and the sort of B team that's playing the second 45 minutes. In the second game, Elanga started with the first team and Rashford with the second, and Elanga didn't really do too well, which I think bodes well for Rashford. So I think he's going to have a good season ahead of him. I was his biggest critic last year because his decision making was really, really poor, but he's got, in terms of pace, power, experience in the league, he's got all those things under his armory. It's just about whether a manager is able to get the right beat out of him, and I'm optimistic.
Yeah, I mean, that's the challenge with Ten Hag and a lot of the... I mean, look at Martial. as well. But he's been playing a lot in pre-season, scoring, looking good again. I mean, what do you make of this Ronaldo sort of situation? Can you see Ronaldo starting the season for you, or do you think he's going to be off somewhere else?
If Ronaldo's still at United game week 1, I'd be worried about having Rashford in the team.
That's how I feel about Sancho as well.
A lot of people are telling me, what, we don't have backup players playing for the club, etc. as well. I feel like that will sort itself out. I feel like if we keep Ronaldo at the club this season, that's sort of delaying moving forward to next year. I feel like the moving forward process will start. It might hamper us a little in the short term, but there's no doubt in my head that we'll be a better team going forward if Ronaldo is not in the club this season. Because then it becomes about this young team growing together and finding an identity under Ten Hag, which might not be the case with Ronaldo, who tends to hog the headlines. He's not really a Ten Hag player as well in terms of what's required in terms of pressing up front as well. So I think it's good for both parties if Ronaldo leaves the club, and I'm hoping that happens as a United fan.
Yeah, we'll see. To me, Ronaldo if Ronaldo's playing, he's the only option at United that I'd consider, and that would even be reluctant because I think the team is worse with him in the side. Which seems a crazy thing to say, doesn't it, when you think about who he is and the amount of goals he scored last year and things. But no, I do agree. It's going to be really interesting to know what Ten Hag does do with that, because Ajax, obviously big club, but it's a different league when you're managing United and the pressure that comes with that. And you've got someone like Ronaldo in the dressing room who you either need to kind of get on side and win round, or just basically say, look, you don't fit into my plan. So it's a big task for him to work out what to do with that. It'd be really interesting to see what kind of happens. We won't go too much into detail about sorry.
What's happened though is Ronaldo doing what he's doing in terms of there was a family problem at first, but then he's not sure of training yet. I think it's put the ball in Ten Hag's court a little in terms of he's capable of at least taking that decision early on, because he's not had a proper preseason compared to the other players. And if you really think about it, since the time Bruno Fernandes joined Manchester United until the time Ronaldo joined us, that's a year and a half, we were good for goals. I don't think we were good defensively, or United presented options from an FPL point of view in defense. But if you think about our first COVID season, those last 8 game weeks after the first lockdown, everybody was on 2 or 3 United attackers. And this was a similar situation where all of them were underpriced. And I see something like that happening again, provided Ronaldo's not the club.
Yeah. I hope so. I mean, we want to see United players, we want to see United back to how they were even a few seasons ago. I mean, under Solskjaer, when then Martial, Rashford, so much pace in the side. When Sancho came in as well, I think a lot of us thought that was going to really improve that kind of attack, and we just didn't really see it. So it's going to be really interesting with United. Again, there's a lot of pressure on Ten Hag, but I mean, given how poorly Rangnick did, and the fans were kind of supportive over that, I imagine they'll be supportive over what he's going to try and build as well. We won't talk about Bailey too much because I talked about him quite a lot with Tom last week, but you've gone for Mitrovic, which is an interesting one because you've talked about these kind of fixture blocks, and Fulham don't have the best kind of opening 5 fixtures, which is putting a lot of people off Mitrovic. Do you just see him as that kind of best option in the kind of 6.5 bracket, and you're not too worried about the fixtures?
Yeah, and it's also a little bit of so there are 2 reasons why I have Mitrovic in my team, because I feel like Fulham in general are comparable, a slightly less rock and roll version of Leeds when they came first to the league, in terms of I expect them to concede a lot and score a lot. And that's sort of, I rate Marco Silva as a manager as well. I know he likes to play front foot football. He likes to play direct football. His teams always are good for goals. And that's something that Luke, FPL Lands, told me as well. He came on our podcast where we were doing a podcast focusing on the promoted teams. And he always thinks that Fulham are capable of maybe finishing in that 9th to 13th region when it comes to teams. So they might be punching above their weight. And when you have somebody who's a talisman, playing for a club like that, that's going to be playing front foot football, I just feel like it's a very, very safe bet to make. So that's one of the reasons, because I expect Fulham to be good. I expect them to score goals. And if they are scoring, we've seen last year as well, he's a talisman. And a close friend of mine actually supports Serbia. And he's seen Mitrovic's growth in the last 3 or 4 years as well. And he's like the player that he was 3 or 4 years ago and the player he is now. it's miles apart. He's a Chelsea fan, and he's like, I wouldn't mind if Chelsea go for a player like Mitrovic because he's grown that much as a player. So he really, really rates him that highly. So I think it's a fairly safe bet. I like him more than Solanke in that price bracket. If I could, I would go to Callum Wilson, but I just don't have the money for that. And it's a structural issue because if I'm going down on Mitrovic, I absolutely don't mind upgrading like a James Justin to a Chelsea defender, get in a Reece James in place, but then it's about combinations, right? So Mitrovic plus a Justin versus, Reece James and that 4.55 million price bracket up front. You don't really have anybody. So that's the sort of decision I'm making there. That's all.
I mean, he's 27, Mitrovic. So, you think when he was in the Premier League, last he was, 25, and then, you're judging him on the kind of seasons before that. I mean, when he was like 23, or he was somehow to get 11 goals and 4 assists. Just broken the record in the Championship. There's a hell of a player there if they can get it right. I mean, a lot's made of his kind of disciplinary record, but I think as he's grown up, that kind of element of his game has gone a bit. There's less worry about that kind of side to him. It's just like you say. It's just whether Fulham can kind of. I have my doubts over them. If they carry on adopting this kind of swashbuckling attacking style, we've seen teams come up and they're exciting to watch. I remember Blackpool years ago, they had no defenders basically, so they just went all out attack. It was Charlie Adam and DJ Campbell, remember him back in the days, and Leeds as well last season. A couple of seasons ago, sort of tried the kind of same thing, and they took a lot of teams by surprise. So do we think Silva's going to kind of try and rein it all back a bit and try and be a bit more sort of? But you think he's going to carry on with this kind of more?
Yeah, because we've seen him with Everton previously in the league, and it's always front foot football. So he might not be as extreme as Bielsa. I feel like all managers grow. I mean, everybody was expecting Eddie Howe last season to be this squashbuckling front foot football manager, and then he showed a lot of pragmatism in the way he set up Newcastle. He showed a lot of pragmatism in the signings that he made for the club. Experienced Premier League players that helped them stay up as well. So I'm expecting something similar from Marco Silva as well. I'm quite optimistic about Fulham generally and their prospects this season.
That's good. Yeah, I mean, I've been quite down on them, so it's nice to hear someone talking positive about them. Let's take a look at some of your defenders then. I mean, you've gone for Meslier in goal, for example. He's your kind of choice of the 4.5s. We're seeing a bit of a split in that decision. I mean, Raya's popular, obviously. Meslier, not seeing too many Sanchez's, but he's kind of obviously there as well. Brighton, a good team defensively. People paying a little bit more. People looking at Mendy, for example, in 5. But you're sticking with the 4.5 goalkeeper. What's kind of drawing you towards Meslier? I'm guessing you're going to say fixtures.
Yeah, fixtures. I mean, they're playing Wolves, Southampton, Chelsea, Brighton, and Everton in their first 5. And, a couple of these teams are sort of goal shy. And even if they aren't, the thing about Meslier that's a little confusing is that when it came to underlying data, he was one of the worst keepers in the league last season. And the year before that, he was one of the best keepers in the league. And so the judgment that you're making based on what you've seen out of Meslier, he's still really young. You should remember that, is what do you think Meslier is? And I think he's a good keeper. I also think there'll be a little bit of a shift under Marsh in terms of Leeds being slightly more practical and pragmatic as well. And it's just a shot based on fixtures, and even if they concede goals, he does tend to make saves, and he does tend to get a lot of bonus points as well. So that's the bet I've made when it comes to the goalkeepers.
Yep. And then you've gone for Justin and Dean. I mean, Justin's an interesting one because, again, fixtures for Leicester not so great in the kind of first 5. I think he's fantastic, James Justin. I really, really rate him highly. I think he's going to be pushing for that England inclusion in our World Cup squads. Obviously, he's got, but the fact he can play in so many different positions, he can play right back, left back, centre back, kind of wherever you wanted him to. I think he'll probably make the cut, I imagine. But you've gone for him over Tomiyasu, for example, in that 4.5 bracket. I mean, there's no doubt these lesser defenders is going to be value there. But how come you've gone for him so early?
Because in the first 3 weeks, they have Brentford at home and Southampton at home. Now, I see these as really, really strong fixtures. Like I said, I'm looking very, very short term with my team at the moment, and whoever is the most attacking Leicester fullback, I think we will get that information by the time game week 1 arrives. He's the one I'm going to go in. The problem with Justin is he could easily, if Leicester decide to play 3 at the back, he could easily be one of the centre backs in that team, and Castagna and Ricardo Pereira could be moving up from, but all three of them are priced at 4.5. So I'm going to wait and see who looks the most attacking out of them and go for that player. That's the thinking. And also, I feel like when Brendan Rodgers gets a chance to manage in the league without any European distractions, he'll do well. He's historically done well. Leicester generally do well. If you think about, again, that's a team I think people are going to be late to jump on, because if you think about it, for most part of last season, they didn't have Fofana or Evans fit, and they had maybe one fullback out of all these three fit at the same time. Now they have everybody fit, and he has a week of training before the games every week, and I think that's a significant advantage. I think what Arsenal were last season and how they benefited because of the lack of European football, Leicester might be this season. I mean, before last season, they were pushing for 4th or 5th every season. So they are a good team, and that's where I am with them.
I think they're the only side in Europe that hasn't made a signing in the transfer window. I was reading somewhere, which considering they struggled so much last season is surprising. I mean, they've got a big squad. They had to make sort of emergency cover signings because they were struggling so much. I mean, Maddison's probably the only one who really came out of last season with can kind of hold his head up high. Barnes was good in spells. I mean, Vardy was fine but got injured for quite a bit. Neither Daka or Iheanacho really kind of came into the picture. But yeah, I completely agree. I think I liked what you said about Meslier. Like, you're making that decision: is he a good goalkeeper or a bad one after one bad season? Yeah. Well, that's the same with Leicester. Yeah. They're a good team. Yeah. They're a good side. We saw at the end of last season, they were scoring goals for fun. They had their full strength team back. Didn't have that Europe to worry about, and they were kind of playing with a lot more freedom. So I completely agree. I think they're going to be a team that people overlook, and Maddison at 8. I think James Justin, Pereira, all these guys, they could be real options. I mean, Vardy, for example. I mean, I don't think we can discount Vardy, right? 9.5 this year.
If I was getting rid of Son, I'd go down to Vardy.
Yeah.
That's what my thinking is. I think he's that good a pick, and you can go haul chasing if you're having a short-term outlook towards your draft, because you're getting home games against Brentford and Southampton in the first 3 weeks. I feel like those are good fixtures, and you like that 9.5 price point because if you want to go up to a Kane, or if you go down to the 6.57 million striker that emerges, it's just giving you money and flexibility. So I don't mind Vardy at all. So what I'm thinking about in terms of team structure is, I think, just 4 or 5 days before game week 1, I'll have to make a decision between a Son draft and a non-Son draft. But I don't see myself going extremely big at the back, even if I don't go non-Son. And I feel like I want to have one player in that 9.5, 10 million bracket, whether it's Sterling, Bruno, or Vardy, because I feel like is still good enough to, I'm comfortable with the team I have with Son here on a premium. And I feel like if I have just 2 more million to invest elsewhere in the squad, it'll be a perfectly fine draft. So I don't want to go fully down on that price point. I think it's good to have a 9.5, 10 million asset who's capable of that upside early on.
I mean, you talk about flexibility. I mean, the only kind of real lack of flexibility got in the team is really with that kind of fourth midfielder with Bailey coming in your side. I mean, we've got Neco Williams and Pereira now, who we didn't have anyone when FPL first launched. We were kind of looking at, well, there was no real 4 million defenders we thought were going to play. The 4.5 options were kind of all defensive mids. We've seen now Pereira playing at kind of a number 10 in Fulham's sort of pre-season games. They're a bit of a gift, those two. But are you a bit worried about Bailey's price point at 5? It doesn't really give you much room to manoeuvre.
Yeah. For me to go this way with a 3-man draft, I need to be sure come game week 1 that Bailey, the likes of Rashford, are looking like first team choices at the moment. And from the noises we've seen in early preseason, they look like options. I also feel like I'll just probably need one more strong enabler to emerge before game week 1 for me to go with this draft, where I have these 2 or 3 enabling picks with strong fixtures early season for me to get Son into my team. So that's where I am. I think it's a wait and watch, but the early signs are good.
Yep, nice. And the final player just to mention is Dean. Again, haven't seen him in too many drafts. He's someone that I really like the look of. You've gone for him over cash, which I thought was interesting. Is that just because of like history in the kind of the Premier League, or have you seen something? Because they're both the same price. I think that's quite a 50-50 decision for a lot of people who consider them. How come you've ended up with Dean?
So, we've been playing FPL for a while, and every time I've seen Dean, I feel like he's a top 4, top 5 player. The quality that he has on his delivery is absolutely amazing. And he ended the season really, really strongly. There's a statistic that I read, which was on the Scout, is since he was back in the team, which was around game week 22 onwards, only Trent created more chances. So he's really, really good when it comes to the chance creation, etc. as well. And I feel like the quality of his delivery is also really good. And Bailey's been playing on the side where Dean plays. So I think that might open up some space for Dean as well. And from what I've read, there are a couple of articles in the Athletic as well where they've invested well in the defensive midfield area, and they've got a new centre back. Both of them are really, really highly rated. And the team's functioning a lot better, because I think what they lacked last season was a little balance in midfield. They didn't have a proper six, which I think they've addressed now. And I feel like, again, the fixtures are there. You have Bournemouth, Everton, Palace, and West Ham. I like those fixtures from a defensive point of view. I feel like, if Dean spikes maybe a couple of clean sheets, I wouldn't be surprised to see a return or two as well, because we've seen with Gerrard, he likes those wing backs to push. And I just feel like in terms of quality, I just rate Dean as a player more than I rate Cash, and that's why I've gone for him.
So Cash 20.9% ownership, Dean 3%.
Yeah,
huge.
Not even
difference.
Looked at the ownership then.
I should be telling you these things, might be influencing your decision. But it's a huge difference again. I mentioned it as being a 50-50 decision, but it's not, because people really do seem to be moving towards Cash. I think Villa are an interesting team, because again, they when Gerrard first came in, they were really, really strong. They signed Coutinho. There's a lot of buzz around them, and then they just really kind of dipped off towards the end of the season. I think it's a long season. They were saved from relegation. I think things just kind of caught up with them, but Gerrard's been quick to act, and they've made some big signings in the transfer window, address the problems that you kind of mentioned, and they played Bournemouth, newly promoted team in game week 1. So I can definitely see the appeal of getting on some of them early.
Yeah, I think Villa are probably on the same level, I'd say, in terms of potential compared to, let's say, a Palace or a Newcastle, or even who did we talk about just recently?
Leicester.
Just these teams that West Ham. Just these teams that have no Europe. Leicester, right? Yeah, just these teams that have no Europe. I think that might be a big factor come game week 5, because I was looking at this chart from Holly where all the teams that are in Europe are playing midweek football every week, game week 5 onwards. And I feel like these teams that are getting a full week before playing their next game, they might do well. And I think a few assets might emerge from these 3 or 4 teams which have a high upside or a high potential. So I'm looking at them quite closely.
Yep. Love it. Well, I think it's a great job. I like, this channel would be very boring if everyone was presenting the same teams. It's great to see a threemium draft with players that kind of all make sense. Like I said, I think Neco Williams, Pereira kind of enable us to even think about this as a kind of option. We just need someone. I mean, we've got Neto at 5.5, who is also a bit of a gift. But if we can get a Bailey, showing the promise that we kind of hoped we'd get from him last season, I think it'd be a really interesting one. So yeah, I like it. Be interesting to see whether you stick with it or whether you do end up going for something a bit more template. But I sense that you'll keep some of these bit more flary picks in. Lateriser, thank you so much for joining us on the channel. It's been great. As mentioned, if anyone wants to hear more from you and the other FPL Wire boys, you type in FPL Wire into YouTube. You can check out the podcast version as well. Some amazing stats on there and great content. And you've already started pre-season, haven't you? You're ahead of me and Mark. Yeah. We need to get our act together.
Yes. I still feel like a lot of the content out there actually is just a shot in the dark. That we were talking before the stream started as well, in terms of we just don't have enough information as yet, and a lot of the big teams are changing the way they play, etc. as well. So I don't see it as a big problem. I think the next 2 or 3 weeks are going to be quite crucial in terms of the picks that emerge and the information we get. So we'll take it from there.
Yep, amazing, cool. Well, thank you so much, and I will speak to you very soon.
Yes, take care. Thank you so much for having me over.